She is plain, and she will never marry. I say it as a kindness." The voice carried across the punch table at Kelvin Hall, sweet as a sugared almond, and Ambrose, Duke of Kelvin, set down his glass without tasting it. He did not turn. A man learned, in a house where 400 people watched the angle of his shoulders for meaning, that turning was itself a kind of speech. So he stood in the shadow of the great south window and let the rest come to him. "My sister's girl, of course," the voice went on, warming to itself. "I have kept her 6 years out of Christian duty, and I shall keep her 60 more, for no man alive will take her off my hands. Look at her. No, do look, there, beside the pillar. That is what 6 years of my table has bought me." Ambrose looked. The girl by the pillar stood very straight in a gown of grey poplin that had been turned at the cuffs and turned again. No feathers, no pearls. Her hair was dressed plainly and honestly, without the tortured little curls the season demanded, and she held a folded fan she plainly had no intention of using. She was not weeping. She was not pretending deafness either, which was the more interesting thing. She had heard every syllable, and she had chosen to go on standing. Something in his chest, long accustomed to lying still, turned over. He knew her. 3 weeks before, on the Kelvin road, a carter's wagon had shed its offside wheel in the rain and dropped a ton of turnips across the lane. Ambrose had been coming back from Wexbridge in a borrowed coat with the collar up, tired, unshaven, and unrecognizable, and he had stopped because a gentleman stops. The carter's horse had been half mad with the noise, plunging in the traces, and while 4 grown men shouted at it, a young woman in a grey cloak had walked straight to its head, taken the bridle, laid her cheek against its wet nose and sung to it, not a hymn. Some silly old counting song about magpies. The horse had gone quiet as a lamb. Ambrose had held the lantern for a full hour. She had thanked him for it and called him a good fellow and given him half a seed cake out of her pocket, and she had gone off up the hill with mud to her elbows, and he had not learned her name. He had thought of her, on and off, ever since, with the faint irritation of a man who has misplaced something valuable. "Barrow," he said. His secretary appeared at his shoulder. "Your Grace." The lady in grey by the pillar. Her name. "Miss Elspeth Danby, Your Grace. Niece of Mrs. Sybil Harrower of Larchfield. Her father was a naval chaplain. He died at sea. There was no provision." "And the lady doing the talking?" "Mrs. Harrower herself, Your Grace. She has a daughter out this season." "Miss Petronella." Barrow hesitated in the way of a man who has served the same master 11 years. "Mrs. Harrower has been telling the room that you mean to open the dancing with Miss Petronella. Has she?" Ambrose handed him the untouched glass. How unfortunate. The musicians had begun to tune. The room understood what that meant and began, in its silken way, to arrange itself, every unmarried woman in the county drifting a half-step toward the centre of the floor, as though pulled by tide. The Duke of Kelvin had not opened a ball in 4 years. 4 years of mourning, of ledgers, of drainage schemes and roof lead, of tenants' funerals and tenants' weddings, and of a slow, grinding certainty that he would in the end marry some carefully chosen stranger who would be perfectly civil to him for 30 years. He walked across his own ballroom, and the room parted for him, and Mrs. Harrower's face bloomed like a hothouse rose as she gathered her daughter's first skirts and turned to meet him. He went past her. He heard the small collective intake of breath behind him and did not care for it. He stopped in front of the pillar and bowed, properly as he would have bowed to a duchess. "Miss Danby," he said, "will you honour me with the opening set?" She looked up at him. Her eyes were grey, and she had a slight, unfashionable scattering of freckles across her nose, and 1 full second she simply looked, the way a person looks at a door that has opened in a wall where there was never a door. Then she said, "You held the lantern." "I did." "You told me your name was Bray. I told you my horse's name was Bray. You were not attending. You were busy with a lunatic gelding." He offered his arm. "The set is forming, Miss Danby, Your Grace." Her voice was quiet and perfectly steady. "There are 40 women in this room who have been preparing for this dance since April. If you do this out of pity, I would rather you did not do it at all. I have been pitied before. It wears badly." "Then we understand each other," Ambrose said, "for I have been flattered before, and it wears worse. Take my arm." She took his arm. The floor cleared for them the way water clears for a stone. He led her to the head of the set and heard, Very distinctly someone whisper, "Who is that?" and someone else answer, "Nobody." And he had the pleasure of watching Elspeth Danby's chin come up a half-inch at the sound. The music began. She danced badly. It was one of the great delights of his life afterward to remember exactly how badly, a beat behind, counting under her breath, treading once firmly upon his instep and apologizing not at all. "You are not attending," he said. "I am attending to my feet, your grace, which need it more than you do. You did not tread on the gelding." The gelding, she said, was not being watched by 400 people, or he should have trodden on me. Ambrose laughed, aloud, in his own ballroom. He felt the ripple of it go out across the room like a stone dropped in a still pond, and he saw the exact moment Mrs. Harrow registered the sound and understood, at last, what she was watching. "Tell me something true, Miss Danby," he said, as the figure brought them together again. "It is the only currency I am short of." She thought about it. She actually thought, which nobody had done in his presence in some years. "I know the name of every man on your home farm," she said. "I have carried soup to 9 of their wives. Your bailiff Waters, the widow Pride, is rent out of his own pocket and thinks nobody knows. Your East Copse wants thinning, and your under-gardener's boy has a talent for grafting that is being wasted on turf edging." She glanced up. "That is 4 true things. I am afraid I have no accomplishments to offer instead. I do not paint. I sing rather badly. I cannot play at all." "Miss Danby," said the Duke of Kelvin, "I have sat through 1100 hours of indifferent harp music, and not one woman in that time has told me anything about my own land that I did not already know or wish to hear as much." The music ended. He bowed. She curtsied and turned and went back to the pillar, because she had been taught to. He watched her go, and made a decision that would have astonished every man who had ever tried to hurry him. He called at Larchfield 11 times in the following fortnight. Mrs. Harrower was gracious to the point of injury. She received him in the good parlour with the fire lit and Petronella arranged upon the sofa with a volume of sermons she did not open, and she sent Elspeth to the still room, or the linen press, or the poultry yard, on errands invented at the door. Ambrose let it happen twice. On the third occasion he simply rose, thanked her, walked out through the kitchen passage, and found Elspeth in the yard up to her wrists in a basin of scalding water and grey feathers. "Your Grace," she said, without straightening, "you cannot be in the poultry yard." "I appear to be in it. Aunt Sybil will say I lured you here." "Aunt Sybil," he said, "may say what she likes. She is going to anyway. Give me the other bird." He plucked a goose. Badly. She corrected his grip twice and did not once apologize for laughing at him. And the low autumn sun came through the yard wall and lit the steam and the loose hair at her temple, and Ambrose thought, with the clean shock of a man stepping off a step he did not know was there, that he had been alone for a very long time and had only just noticed. On the 12th day he asked her, standing in the lane by the Larchfield gate with the elms dropping their last leaves on both of them, and she was silent so long that he heard his own heart. "Say it again," she said at last. "Marry me." "Why?" "Because you tell me true things. Because you sang to a horse in the rain and never asked who was holding the lantern. Because I have spent 4 years being managed, and 11 days being spoken to, and I find I prefer the second." He took her hand. "And because I love you, Miss Danby, which I'd not planned on and cannot now help." She began to cry, silently and furiously, and told him it was the wind. He gave her his mother's ring and asked one favour of her: 3 days' silence. He had a settlement to draw and a great-aunt to write to, and he wished, just once, to do a thing properly and quietly before the county got hold of it. She kept the secret. It cost her more than he knew. The Michaelmas ball at Kelvin Hall was the largest the house had held since his father's time. Ambrose stood receiving for 2 hours and watched the doors for a grey gown, and when it came at last it was not grey. She had contrived, God knew how, a gown of soft dove silk, plainly cut, with his ring on a ribbon at her throat, because she had been forbidden to wear it on her hand. An hour into the evening, Mrs. Harrower screamed. It was very well done. She stood in the middle of the yellow drawing-room with one hand at her bosom and the other flung out, and she cried that her garnet brooch, her poor dead mother's garnet brooch, had been taken from her reticule in the cloakroom, and would somebody search. And her eye went, tragically, unwillingly, to her niece. The room turned. Ambrose at the doorway did not move at all. They found it, of course. In Elspeth's reticule, folded into her handkerchief, gold filigree and dark red stones, and Mrs. Harrower put her hands over her face and said, in a voice pitched to carry to the furthest card table, "Oh, Elspeth, oh, my dear, foolish girl. I have kept her out of charity, your grace, and this is how she has always wanted what was not hers." Elspeth Danby stood in the centre of that room with 100 faces on her, and did not say one word in her own defence. She simply stood, straight as a pillar, white to the lips, and waited for it to be over, because 6 years had taught her that it was always over eventually. Ambrose crossed the floor. "Madam," he said to Mrs. Harrower, and the whole room went quiet, because he had not raised his voice and had not needed to. "When did you last see this brooch?" "Why, this evening, in the cloakroom before. My footman Wilkes stood at the cloakroom door from 9 o'clock. He has been in my family's service 22 years, and he does not invent. He let that sit for the space of one breath. I will send for him if you wish it. Do you wish it?" Mrs. Harrower's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. "I thought not." He turned from her as though closing a drawer. "Miss Danby, open your hand." Elspeth looked at him. Then she raised her hand and opened it, and on her palm, warm from being held there all evening, lay a heavy old ring of gold and pearl. "That is the Kelvin betrothal ring," Ambrose said, to the room. "It has been in my family 400 years. Miss Danby accepted it and me 12 days ago in the lane at Larchfield, and she has kept my secret since at my particular request, which I now regret, since it has cost her this." He lifted her hand and set his mouth to it, unhurried, in front of every soul in the county. "She is to be my wife. I would be grateful if the person who put that brooch where it was found would consider the matter closed. I do not intend to pursue it. I do not intend to think of her again." Somebody laughed, a short, astonished bark, quickly smothered. And then, from the back of the room, quite clearly, Petronella Harrower said, "Mamma, you told me you had put it in her bag." Ambrose did not look at Mrs. Harrower. It was, he thought afterward, the only genuinely cruel thing he did that night, and he did not regret it. The room looked at her instead, all of it at once, and then, in ones and twos, it stopped looking, which was worse. He drew Elspeth's arm through his and walked her the length of the yellow drawing-room and out into the long gallery, where the candles ran away in front of them in a double line of small warm flames, and she was shaking so hard he had to stop and hold her by the shoulders. "You should not have," she said. "You have made an enemy. I have made a wife. Ambrose." It was the first time she had used his name, and she did it as though were stepping onto ice. "I am plain." She was not lying about that part. In 10 years they will all still be saying it, the Duke of Kelvin, who might have had anyone, and took the Danby girl with the turned cuffs. He looked at her for a long moment in the candlelight, the grey eyes, the freckles, the stubborn chin, the ring back where it belonged on her hand. "Then they will be wrong," he said, "as they are wrong about most things, and it will not matter, because you and I will be at home." He smoothed a strand of hair from her temple with his thumb and let his hand stay. "You are not plain, Elspeth. You are simply not decorated. There is a difference, and I have had 38 years to learn it, and one woman in a rainstorm to teach it to me. They were married at Kelvin in the 2nd week of December, in a church so full that the farm men stood along the walls with their hats in their hands. Mrs. Harrower was invited. Elspeth insisted upon it, and Ambrose, who had wanted very much to refuse, discovered that he could refuse his wife nothing, and that this was going to be the shape of the rest of his life. Her aunt sat in the 4th pew in maroon silk and did not speak to anyone. And afterward Elspeth kissed her cheek at the church door and thanked her for 6 years of a roof, and the older woman went red and then white and got into her carriage without a word, and never in her life again told anyone that her niece would not marry. That winter the undergardener's boy was apprenticed to the head grafter at Kelvin. The Widow Pride's rent was struck off the book entirely. The East Copse was thinned, and on the last night of the year, walking the long gallery with his wife's hand tucked in his arm and the frost furring the windows, the Duke of Kelvin stopped beneath his own portrait, and his mother's, and his grandfather's, and thought that there would one day be another face on that wall. Plain grey-eyed face with freckles across the nose, and that of all of them, hers would be the only one worth stopping for. "What are you smiling at?" Elspeth asked. "A true thing. he said, and did not tell her, and she did not press him, and they walked on together into the warm,